Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. The official launch of a new missing child alert system here in Wisconsin hopes to reunite more families and their children.
Two high-profile cases were the driving force behind this new system. We learned today this new alert is already having a positive impact. Emily Byer joins us with the new criteria for this alert system. Emily.
Cami and Bill, initially what lawmakers said would be a purple alert is now called the missing child alert. This new system has less strict criteria than an amber alert. Governor Tony Evers signed the PRINCE Act in April. This legislation revises and expands the definition of a person at risk to include children. That act is named after 5-year-old Prince McCree, whose body was found in a dumpster after going missing in Milwaukee last year. We've also reported on the case of 10-year-old Lily Peters of Chippewa Falls. Her body was found a day after going missing in 2022. Attorney General Josh Kaul saying today the new system is already making a difference.
It's my privilege to be able to tell you today that the first missing child alert was issued earlier this week. It was based on a missing child here in Milwaukee, and that child was recovered safely. So the alert is already having an impact.
And that's the result they're always looking for. So what does that criteria look like? Well, the child has to be under 18, believed to be incapable of returning home without assistance due to a physical or mental condition or disability, or the child is under 10 years old. It's within 72 hours of the child's disappearance. The situation does not meet the criteria for another alert, such as an amber alert. The child is reported missing to the National Crime Information Center, and there is a sufficient information to give the public to help find that child. Now, only Wisconsin's Division of Criminal Investigation can issue a missing child alert. If a child is missing, call your local law enforcement right away. They then will work with the state and other partners to take next steps to find the missing child. Bill.